In its first ever report on child grooms, the United Nations Children's Education Fund, UNICEF, says at least 115 million boys and men around the world got married as children. Of these, 1 in 5 children, or 23 million, were married before the age of 15. Conducted in 82 countries, the study shows the practice is prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, South Asia and East Asia and the Pacific. The Central African Republic leads the African continent with child marriages among males at 28%. Early child marriage has often been synonymous with girls, but the new UN report is changing that narrative, as boys too, it appears, are also victims. And to further discuss these findings on child marriages, I'm joined in studio by James Elder. He's the UNICEF Regional Chief of Communication, Eastern and Southern Africa. James Elder, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Some surprising research findings there, because we often talk about early child marriages as synonymous with a girl child. Now, 115 million boys and men around the world have gotten married as children. What is the significance of this report by UNICEF regarding marriage?
Yeah, you're spot on. We do talk about girls and we need to, but when it comes to boys, no one's ever done this research before, and it's a very, very large number, and it means that in the same way that girls are losing that childhood, they're losing that chance to get an education, to be a good mum, boys are having their childhood stolen. Invariably they become husbands, they become dads, because that tends to follow, and you've got 16 and 17-year-olds who are still children suddenly trying to look after a family. So the significance is you not only steal their childhood, but invariably then they don't have the skills, they've left school, they can't go on to get the kind of work that they look for, and they get into the type of labour and cheap employment that is never going to suit them, that will invariably lead them to a life of poverty, perpetuates their poverty for a whole group of society who hopefully we're going to look after a family. So
we're looking at the 17, 18, 15-year-olds and we're saying, you know, there are economic repercussions that come as a result of the early marriages there. But what are the factors that are making these young boys, though, susceptible to marriage?
Yeah, you're dead right on the economic factors. Just on that, we know, for example, that when young people, boys and girls, stay in school, they tend to add about 10% to future income for every year they stay in school. So there's a right in principle and a right in practice argument for this. Now, why is it happening? You know, a lot of it comes from the right place. Communities think they're actually trying to end poverty, although they're actually exacerbating it. They think they're protecting their kids. Invariably, that's not the case, because you add all sorts of health risks again to boys and girls when they marry young. And then there's a lot of customary, religious and traditional things that societies have. What's very important then is that you have this conversation, and that's what UNICEF tries to do, to be part of communities and to listen to what why they're doing this, and for us then to explain to them why delaying marriage makes such a difference for girls and for boys.
UNICEF report lists sub-Saharan Africa as one of the regions where this is common, or this is quite prevalent. So in terms of Africa, though, what should authorities do in Africa to eradicate, you know, the early child marriages for boys, as well as talking about the girl child?
Yeah, I think two big things. One is to make that economic argument. The more that people understand just how much economic return there is for societies, in my world, in development, there literally isn't anything you can do that has a bigger impact for society and for the economy than keep kids in school. Give them a quality education. And when you marry boys and marry girls, they leave school. So that's a huge one. And then within that, legislation is key. You do need those laws in place, but we know that there are countries with good laws and not the practice. So then the next part for governments is to make sure that communities are having this discussion, create an open space so that communities, because this is invariably in rural areas, make sure that people know, firstly, there's a law in place, but secondly, why for your society, for that community that people are trying to build up, while you actually do the opposite. You do damage to it by marrying off girls and boys.
So as a final pointer and breaking it down for us, though, give us a breakdown of exactly what is the impact in the lives of boys when this happens.
I think the main one is they're out of school. The next one is a generational impact, which is basically, we now know that the biggest influence you can have on kids is not an expensive one. It's about when you've got a 1-year-old or a baby, a 2-year-old, it's about knowing how to play with them. It's about knowing the right food to give them. Those things don't cost a lot of money, but they do necessitate that you've had an education and that you're strong in yourself. So if you're a 23-year-old, 26-year-old, you know a bit about yourself, you know a little bit about nutrition, you know how to play with a child. That doesn't cost anything, that's just about basic stimulation. But if you're a child yourself, having a child, you don't know these things. So the real cost is that you just continue this cycle of poverty. You steal one childhood and you bring a new child in with giving them a parent who doesn't have the ability to bring them up in the way that kids so desperately need.
All right, James Elder, we'll leave it there for the moment, but thank you very much on that very surprising report on the plight of the boy child.